Welcome back, Sergiu here. I'm gonna be making a video series covering the Nikon SB-910 Speedlight. Yeah, it's the big bastard. Right, before we get into it, let me explain why I'm making this series. Now, if you've watched any of my other stuff, then you know that I like messing around with technology and machines, and that includes cameras now. I'm not a pro photographer, and I do not claim to be one. However, I do believe that if we learn to use these machines properly, then we can get some amazing results, even out of older systems like this one. So I've got the SB-910 here, and the Nikon D800, which I'll be using to demonstrate the 910 with. Now, I will be sharing what I've learned so far about this system and photography in general, and hopefully you'll be able to make something from it. If you're a Nikon user, pro or not, you know these speedlights, you know. Unfortunately, they have been discontinued for a few years now, but worry not, they still work as they're intended to, and they're packed full of features, and I want to see it in action. I want to learn what it does and how it does it. So I've been looking up some videos, and I haven't really been able to find anyone actually sitting there and dialing in functions and attempting to demonstrate them with these speedlights. So I thought I'll be taking that upon myself to do so, and we shall see what happens. The video you're watching now is the first one in this series, and I'll be covering its manual functionality, as well as specs, manual flash theory, and a few other bits, while everything else will be covered in upcoming videos. And yes, I do recommend this unit, even though nobody's paying me to say any of these things, because it's been discontinued, obviously. But it's a lot of fun to use once you learn it, and I think, and it's absolutely worth the price. And speaking about the price, they came down in price so much that even a non-professional can sit there and basically justify the price. Because let's think about the 900, for example, the SB-900, which is exactly the same as this one, but it has some reported overheating issues, which apparently you can overcome. I don't know, I've not used that one. You can look it up, it's even cheaper, but you can find these for like 100, 150 quid these days, and it's on eBay, and it's amazing. Because if you don't know these speedlights, then think about it like this. Think of a speedlight with studio strobe functionality and 200mm zoom, which is quite amazing. Now, one must mention, I don't have all the accessories that come with it, and that includes the color correction filters. Now, obviously, I'm in a controlled environment, so that's not going to get in the way. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to leave the camera on a flash white balance, and we'll just go from there. So yeah, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I can do this. Let's get the tech specs out of the way first. So first and foremost, the flash modes of operation are as follows. You got ITTL, auto aperture flash, non-TTL auto flash, distance priority flash, manual flash, and repeating flash. Now, recycle time is more or less 2 seconds with nickel metal hydride batteries and 4 or 5 with lithium, but it will take external battery packs such as the Nikon SD-9, which boosts recycle times to less than 1 second depending on the batteries and the number of fires significantly. I'll be covering batteries and battery life at the end. Effective output in all the automatic modes is from 0.6 to 20 meters or so, and in manual you can expose correctly from 2 meters or so all the way to an impressive 53 meters at ISO 100 in FX, with the zoom head all the way to 200 millimeters. Now, guide number is rated at 34 meters at ISO 100 at 35 millimeter zoom in FX with standard illumination pattern. It has 3 illumination patterns, which are focusing weights pretty much, where standard stands for unweighted, and there is an even one and center weighted one as well, and they alter the guide number values accordingly. Now, flash duration is as follows. You got 1/880th of a second at full output, and it goes all the way through to 1/38,500th of a second at 1/128th of the output. Now that makes for 8 full stops of range in total, and plenty of third stops in between. The zoom head range is from 17 to 200 mm for FX full frame, 12 to 200 for DX crop sensor, 14 for FX with the wide diffuser on, and 10 for DX with the wide diffuser on. Bouncing capability is pretty much 180 degrees all round and 90 degrees up. It has focal plane high shutter speed mode for high speed syncing. Obviously that depends on your camera body. Mine starts shifting both shutter curtains at 1/250th of a second. The 910 will sync nicely all the way through to 1/8000th of a second with my camera here. It also provides an old school, and I'm gonna butcher this, anyway, PC screw lock connection for syncing the speedlight that way. It has autofocus assist illumination. It has test firing to test your setup, and that's about it, because the rest of the stuff will come up as we go through the various functions. Right, let's have a look then, shall we? Well, this video doesn't cover the wireless capabilities of the Speedlight, as I said, so what I'll do is I'll have it on the hot shoe of my camera, just like the paparazzi do. Besides, this is the only way that I can demonstrate the GN manual mode, and we'll get to that later on. Now, I'm not going to be doing ETTR or any of that fancy exposure palaver. I'll simply just be showing you the render straight out of camera as I'm testing some of the claimed guide numbers. Now, obviously, there's no point in shooting raw in this case, so I'll call up manual mode so that we can get started. So, the way to do that is quite easy. All you need to do is coming around the back panel of the unit, you need to press the mode button and then use the scroll wheel to scroll all the way through until you see the M letter at the top corner of your screen. That's pretty much it. You're in manual mode. Hit OK. Now, the display shows you your flash to subject distance as it links to your camera to update to the exposure variables as you're dialing them in order to do the math for you, which makes things quite a bit easier. However, the one thing to look out for is this symbol here right in the other corner of the screen. That basically shows you that the link has been established. Now, when you press the first function button labeled zoom, what you're gonna see is the fact that the Speedlight zoom head actually matches the focal length of your lens. And if you have a zoom lens, then as you change the focal length, the Speedlight will obviously adjust to match the focal length in order to compensate for whatever zoom you're using. Now, say you want to introduce a zoom of your own choosing, then you can obviously press the zoom button and simply just use the scroll wheel to introduce whatever value you want. If you want to come back to whatever value was the synced value, then just hit the next function button, which is the reset button for the zoom. So that goes back to whatever value you have on the lens. The third button simply refers to the illumination patterns, which you basically have 3 of them to choose from. You may also choose to not allow the Speedlight to sync to the lens, in which case you want to go through to the menu and enable manual zoom. Now you will have to manually introduce the zoom figures that you want to work with. Remember that this only works when your Speedlight is connected through to the hot shoe of your camera through a TTL cable, for example, or simply just plugged in there. Now, there's only one more button next to the zoom one as you go back to the main page, which is labeled M. Now, press that, and once you do, that's basically how you introduce power values. The last button, the big red button, is basically your test fire button, so you can test fire your settings. Also, you can choose to use that as a modeling light instead. Now, if you want to do this, all you need to do is go through to the menu and select the flash test button and then switch from flash to modeling. Now you have a modeling light. Also on the main screen, you can see an icon on the right side of the screen, which looks like the 910. It basically shows you that the autofocus assist light is on. Should you not want to use it, all you need to do is go through to the menu, go to the AF tab, and you're presented with 3 options. Leave it to on and it will use the Speedlight's own autofocus assist illumination. Set it to off and it will use the camera's assist illumination. Set it to AF only and it will disable the flash functionality of the Speedlight overall while leaving just the AF assist illumination on. And that's pretty much all there is to the manual flash screen. Now, don't forget that once the Speedlight is linked to your camera, It completely takes over the flash functionality and flash controls of the camera, apart from the syncing functions such as the high-speed sync, red-eye sync, back curtain sync, but also FV lock, even though FV lock has to do with the opto modes, which will be covered in other videos. Now everything else you control from the Speedlight's own controls, and if you think about it, it makes sense, because the Speedlight is basically like having another camera that works within the same frame with your main camera. Before I take some pictures, I want to share what I learned about using flashes in manual mode. Now, skip this part, obviously, if you already know. However, this goes for every Speedlight and studio strobe out there, regardless of brand or size, because essentially they're all the same thing. They all do the same thing. It's just that some of them are more powerful than the others, and studio strobes are a bit more in depth. First of all, I'm going to assume that you understand the fact that your camera deals with ambient light and speedlight or strobe light in distinct ways, as the following is referring to the speedlight exposure only. If you don't understand what sync speed is, and why shutter speed is irrelevant to speedlight exposure in most cases below sync speed, I can explain that in another video. Right, so have the guide number table of your particular unit. As an example, this is the one Nikon provided with the SB-910. So you have 5 of them basically. That's the first one, which represents full power for different illumination patterns and different formats and different zooms. And then you have 4 more, the first 2 of which are basically representing the various power levels here, as well as, well, for each zoom head position in FX or DX. And then the last 2 represent the same thing, but for auto FP high speed sync. However, I'm gonna be shooting below that, so I'm gonna be using this table here because I'm using an FX camera as my reference. But what's the guide number anyway? Well, the guide number is the manufacturer's measurement given for the distance between your flash and subject, at which your flash will bounce just about enough light off your subject to give you correct exposure of the subject at ISO 100, which is reference ISO value, for a given zoom head position if applicable, and power output value. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that the guide number more specifically refers to the distance between your on-axis, unaltered and bare flash head and your subject. If you're using a model filter of any sort, it will profoundly alter the projection envelope of the incident light from the flash, practically rendering guide numbers useless. In this case, you really should be using a light meter to measure for incident light yourself in order to speed up the process. Also, guide numbers are more or less halving or doubling with every 2 stops of flash-related exposure, so basically your flash power and aperture values. Now, in one way or another, guide number measurements should be provided for every stop of flash power and every zoom head position if the speedlight has zoom. With that out of the way it works is that the aperture automatically divides your guide number by whatever f-stop value you're using, because the guide number is really just a numerical representation of the inverse square law with reference to the speedlight as a source. Basically, what that means is that if your speedlight correctly exposes your subject at an effective distance of x, at zoom y, at power output z for ISO 100, the light then needs to make it through your aperture as well, which dims it by whatever aperture value you're working with, thus reducing the flash to subject distance. So the more you open up your aperture, the further the flash needs to be from your subject, or the closer the flash is, the more you need to close down your aperture. And obviously, if you're using an ISO different than 100, your entire exposure, including flash exposure, is being lifted or lowered accordingly, thus affecting the relationship between the aperture and effective speedlight to subject distance. ISO is just electronic amplification of the exposure in case of digital cameras, although the same thing applies to film. In other words, you need to multiply the guide number you've chosen up or down by however many f-stop equivalent values your ISO is lifting it before dividing by your f-stop value of choice. That's how you work out how far away your flash needs to be at ISOs different than 100. Think of it in terms of mapping ISO values to f-stop values stop by stop. And one last mention. Note how we said that the guide number is a numerical representation of the inverse square law with reference to the speedlight. Notice how only the flash to subject distance is being used, not the camera to subject distance. That is because, as it happens, the angular size of the subject as it is being projected onto the sensor or film changes proportionally with distance and applies the inverse square law in reverse, thus maintaining exposure. In other words, moving the camera back and forth from the subject only changes its size in the frame and not its brightness. So you can get as creative as you wish. as manual mode is the only mode that truly gives you the most accurate control over flash exposure. However, for creative purposes or otherwise, most people already know the flash to subject distance and their f-stop, and I did the same here today. So let's take some pictures and demonstrate the theory. Now, what I've got here set up, as you can see on the screen, is that I'm running this HDMI cable from the camera straight into the computer so that you can see the straight out of camera pictures. And my subjects are basically a couple of dragon figures, and I've also set up a lamp behind them, and I'll be trying to do some effects with that. Now let's see what happens. I have a distance of roughly 1.5 meters between the flash head and the subject, and I'm gonna be using on-axis flash with no mods. So working backwards, instead of looking for flash to subject distance, we're gonna be looking for guide number. Now I wish to shoot at ISO 100 and f4, so I'm gonna dial in ISO 100, which is already there, and f4. Whoops. That's f4, and I'm gonna be shooting at I don't know, it doesn't really matter, 125. So what I need to do to find my guide distance is to basically multiply my 1.5 meters with 4, which basically gives me 6 meters. So what I'm gonna need to do is basically just look for 6 meters, and I'm gonna call up the guide number table. Now I know that I'm at 85 millimeter zoom, because the Speedlight is linking to the focal length of my lens, and I'm using the AFS Nikon 85mm 1.8G. Right, let's see, 6 meters. So that is right here at 1/64th of power. So I'm gonna dial that in. Okay, and let's take the shot. Now I'm gonna manually focus because I kind of know what I'm looking for here. And just watch the screen as I take the shot. Okay, so as you can see here, that looks just about right. And now let's move back by half a meter, so right about here I would say. So now I have 2 meters between me and the subject. So all I need to do is multiply 2 meters by f4, so that gives me 8 meters. So what I'm gonna need to do is call up the guide number table once again, and I'm gonna be looking for 8 meters this time, which is right here at 1/32 of the power. So I'm gonna dial that in, and then I'm gonna take the shot, and then we'll if you watch the screen, we're just gonna compare it to the first. So I'll manually focus again like so, and then I'm gonna take the shot and compare it to the first. So there you go. So that's the second shot. And that's the first shot. Second, first. Let's zoom in. So that's the first one there. And that's the second one. That's close enough, I would say. Right, let's say I want to shoot at I don't know, ISO 200, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna dial in ISO 200, and that's one more stop worth of ISO. However, what I could do is just use f5.6, but I still want to shoot at f4. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna turn down the Speedlight power by 1 stop to compensate for that. So I'm going to turn down the Speedlight power to 1/64th again, and by taking a shortcut, basically the one thing that you can think of is every time you do every single flash related exposure value setting kind of thing, doubling the value, whether it's ISO or flash power or aperture, every time you double the value, you get 1 stop of light, you know, up or down. So that's one shortcut you can take, which is exactly what I've done here. So now I'm back at 1/64th ISO 200, still 2 meters. So I'm gonna focus again. I'm gonna take the shot and we'll do the same thing, we'll compare it. Okay, so this is the ISO 200 compared to ISO 100. So that's 100, 200, 100, 200. You can see the difference in the lamp behind him. The specular highlights are a bit blown, but hey ho. I wish I could afford the light meter, because that would really allow me to test the claimed guide numbers and so much more actually. But yeah, especially if you're using more than one speedlight. But anyway, let's simplify things a bit. Now, you don't have to do all that math if you don't want to, because remember that 910 will do it for you. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna use a reflector, this reflector that I've set up here, and I'm gonna be using that to bounce the speedlight off of that and onto the subject, and then I'm gonna be doing a long exposure to capture some of that lamp behind the dragons, so I can get like a fiery kind of look. So I can sit there and roughly ray trace the distance between the speedlight head and the subject. And then also what I need to consider is the angle of coverage, which is actually given in the manual. So if we go back to the manual and look for angle of coverage, I'm at 85, so that's the numbers that I'm gonna keep in mind basically. And then the other thing I need to consider is the shape of the reflector, and obviously that's going to affect once you're bouncing, that's going to affect the light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my my picture control over to a preset that I've set prior to this. And the other thing I want to do is I want to set my flash syncing to rear curtain sync, like so, because essentially I'm going to be shooting a longer exposure of 1 second handheld. So let's dial it back down to 1 second, and I still want to shoot at f4. In fact, you know what, I'm gonna be sitting down here, and to make things better, I'm gonna unplug the light because I need to record some of that lamp. So hope it makes sense. So anyway, back to the screen. Let's see what I'm gonna be. I'm using spot metering at the moment. So I'm gonna be shifting it over to center weighted, because that's gonna help me a bit more at what I'm trying to do here. So I got what 2 meters now between the bounce, between the speedlight head and the subject, including the bounce. So I'm gonna compensate by 1 more stop, because I can't there's gonna be some scattering and all that stuff. So I'm also gonna need to turn the ISO down back down to 100. Oops, 100. So we're gonna do that, and then I'm gonna try and see what happens. Basically, let's see if the manual mode helps in this case. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm going for. See? So let me put the light back on. Oh man, that's bright. I'm hoping that you can see what I was going for here. It looks like fire. It's on fire. So yeah, basically that was a handheld shot. Obviously using a tripod gives a lot better results, but you can also work with handheld, because the Speedlight is essentially, as I said, it's like having another camera that works on the same frame with your main camera. So because it's so fast, it just throws all that motion. So I hope that makes sense. And speaking about motion, that now brings me to distance priority mode, or distance priority manual mode, which is the other manual mode that this Speedlight does. So let's talk about that. This mode, aka guide number or GN mode, basically is easily accessible, just like manual. All you need to do is you press the mode button here, and then you scroll all your way through until you see GN at the top of your screen. So this mode only works when the flash is pointing straight ahead, and only works while on the hot shoe of your camera or while connected through a TTL cable. It's the easiest mode on this Speedlight after TTL, I think. You just manually dial in the distance between the Speedlight and the subject, and you're pretty much done. The Speedlight will work out its power output accordingly based on the exposure you're going for, and you can also compensate by 3 stops up or down. The screen will indicate your usable distance range by this black bar here. The flash testing button may blink for a few seconds to indicate possible wrong exposure also. Now, why would you want to use this flash on the camera in the first place and pointing straight ahead? Well, one thing I can think of is capturing motion, because let's say you're going for a long exposure or something in motion, and you want to freeze that something so it's visible. This mode makes it easier to do things like that. So let's just try to introduce some motion in the dragon composition here. I'm still at 1 second f4 and ISO 100. As you can see now, the screen indicates GN instead of manual. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn the light off again. Well, not yet, because I can't see where I'm going. So simply what I need to do is I'm gonna just input, I don't know, say I got like what, 1 meter maybe or so between the Speedlight head and the subject. So I'm gonna do 1 meter, and then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to focus on the dragons and then move the camera up so that I can introduce some motion, and we'll see if they become frozen at the end, basically, because I'm still in rear curtain sync. So we'll see if we can create some fire around the dragon's head. Well, that's what I'm trying to do anyway. Okay, here goes. Yeah, something like that. See? That kind of thing. In fact, you know what? Let's set it to monochrome. Let's see what that looks like. And then I'm gonna set it to, well, I'm gonna crop it then. Well, I don't need to crop it, I'll just zoom in. So let's have a look. In monochrome. Do you see what I mean? As long as you can eyeball the distance between the subject and the flash, this mode makes sure that the subject is exposed correctly as far as the flash is concerned. Now obviously this is just experimental, it's not exactly right, but you can Photoshop that into something interesting. Another reason you may want to use this mode is for when you're shooting subjects which are extremely close to the flash, such as in macro photography, as this mode will allow you to dial in numbers such as low as 0.3 meters, which is effectively lower than the lowest manual output in manual mode. So think about the implications of that. You can also use these low numbers to illuminate out of focus objects in the near out of focus field for interesting compositional effect and even more more even lighting kind of thing. So let's actually try that. Let's what I'll do now is I'll be closer to the dragons, and I'm gonna try and have them in the out of focus field right near to the camera. I'm gonna focus on the lamp this time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shoot at f2 this time. So I'm gonna dial that down to 2, and I'll see what shutter speed I'm going for once I meter that. So let's see. Yeah, that's probably about right. And then I'm gonna just shoot. Let's see what happens. Yeah, that's an interesting effect. Again, GN mode. Now if I try to, I'm gonna try monochrome. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna try cyanotype. Yeah. How about that? So I'm hoping that demonstrates the GN mode for you. And that pretty much covers all of the manual modes for today. Obviously, as I said, The other modes are gonna be coming up in the other videos, but I do still want to talk about batteries, so let's get into that. What I'm using actually are these Energizer's batteries, rechargeable nickel metal hydride batteries, which contain 2 amp hours worth of electrons each. Now you can get around 150 or so bursts out of 4 of those, and that's what the charger looks like at full output. And the voltage performance is rather good for these Energizers, nearly all the way through, even though the recycle current drawn by the 910 is quite high. Now I can't remember the exact values, but even though various people have tested the recycle draw for various Speedlight models, for my application I don't need to worry about C value that much. I just wanted a battery that behaves linearly and that has an obvious voltage drop. It makes things easier to it makes it easier to identify when it's time to change the batteries, basically, because the recycle time will get a lot slower, all of a sudden kind of thing. And basically, yeah, well, batteries are a compromise, honestly. I mean, you can get more fires out of lithium batteries, for example, than you do from nickel metal hydride, but lithiums won't let out as many electrons at once, so your recycle times will double compared to nickel metal hydride. Or you could use alkaline batteries because they're cheap, but the voltage drop on those is, it just ain't flat. So your recycle time will change all the time, as they discharge. But yeah, don't forget about the SD9 battery pack though. It will change your experience if you are doing flash photography and the recycle times matter to you. So I think that's about it for today. Yeah, stick around because there's other videos coming up, obviously, in which I'm going to be covering the other functions, including wireless functions, the commander mode, all that stuff of the 910. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you later. Bye bye.